Steve's World, or Steve's Place, uh, where we meet every Sunday night and have different guests here showing up and giving us some insight into their inventions and everything. But first, we have a few housekeeping things. I'd like to invite everyone to join the TeslaTech YouTube channel. We have 30 years of innovative ideas in energy and health. To check out the TeslaTech channel, just go to the teslatech.info and click on the YouTube icon. Of course, all you guys know that. If you have a problem, joining, if you go to the link down below, you can join now. And I email this out every time I send an email. I'm sending out the direct link to the join page. It's $9.99 a month, and we have all kinds of videos up there. We're starting to put all the global science ones that Dean Stern used to have up there. We're up through about 1991, I believe. Anyway, I'd also like to remind everyone to come to the Extraordinary Technology Conference and Expo in Albuquerque, New Mexico, August 10th to 14th at the Crown Plaza. Room rates are really reasonable, $82. You can get a 30% discount if you sign up now, so it's very affordable. Teens are free. And the only things I ever regretted in life is the things I actually didn't do. Even though I might have made some mistakes, and you may have some regrets on that and everything, what you really regret is what you could have done but didn't do. So come on out to the conference this year. I know you're going to have a great time. Sign up early, save a lot of money that way, and be sure to use our room right at the hotel. Now, for our tonight's show will be Dan Davidson, who wrote the book Shape Power, and he'll be enlightening us up on what shape power is and how it affects things like anti-gravity and that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. You got it, Dan?
Go. Okay. Howdy, Steve.
How's it going?
Nice to be talking here on your show. And I've been support you for the last 20, 30 years. Well, you've been talking to the original TeslaTech that we had before in the beginning, and it morphed into the TeslaTech that you have now. And I'm sure glad to be able to still be able to help you.
We appreciate it. Anyway, you can just dive in there and tell people.
We're going to talk about shape power and how it fits into some of the alternative research that I'm doing. Some of the topics I'm going to cover is how I got into TeslaTech and alternate research. Boy, I can't hardly read my slides, Steve. Anyway, we're going to talk about where science is today mostly retarded. I've been sitting on some of this stuff for the last 60 years, and there's nothing happened. Nothing. We should have been out in outer space by now. There's an emerging new science that's going to come out regardless of all the suppression. I talked about KEELY and mass to energy control, Dr. X, shape power and how I discovered it, how shape converts the forces to other energies and forces, gravity effects in trees, geophysics, bugs, and interesting tales, and radio deactivation. We have the ability to deactivate radioactive material, and science keeps it under attack. And yet we've proved it in the lab 10 times over, and a few shape power applications. Science is the study and learning of God's creation. Man's technology is the implementation of science. I got into research rather early in life. I had a couple of near-death experiences when I was young, and I think for some reason they opened some doors that allowed me to see other things that most people don't. And when I was a teenager, I read books that were quite interesting. It was a big area of the flying saucers. I lived in a little town in Black Hills called Sturgis. You've probably all heard of that. And I read books by Desmond Ezzy and George Adamski, Behind the Flying Saucers and things like that. I found out science wasn't there yet. I was hoping we would have the ability to start making spaceships and going in and exploring outer space. And there was a lot of TV shows that went up to that, but that was as far as we ever got. And I realized that we weren't making any progress, so I dedicated my life to understanding how God's universe really functioned. And when I did that, doors opened. Where science is today. In the pre-1900s, the universe was created by higher intelligence. There was a universal acceptance of the ether as mind force. And then in the 1900s to 1990, Einstein came along and muddled up the works. And yet Einstein came out later on and accepted the ether. But we basically live in a multidimensional universe based on theories of special relativity, general relativity, and quantum electrodynamics. The ether was eliminated by the Michaelson-Morley experiment. And this was a misinterpretation. This is a big mistake, and it set science back for 80, 90 years. Basically, they said there's no creative force. So this is a really big screw up. Velocities greater than c are not possible, yet we saw in some of the early Tesla demonstrations 5 times the speed of light. This was demonstrated repeatedly and was done with good oscilloscopes and other things. You probably wonder how you can measure faster than c. Well, it's quite possible with some of the new microscopes and telescopes. This retarded physics for 100 years. And basically, they suppressed anything like transmutation, greater than greater than c velocity. The ether was thrown out the window. Over unity output. I personally saw many experiments that demonstrated over unity. A lot of times we weren't able to repeat them, but they were flukes and then obviously showed they were there. They were measured with good oscilloscopes, and this was basically proven quite readily. And then there's things like energy healing and stuff, which we've gotten into a little bit in science, but probably nurses laying hands on is about as far as you can get. At the present, 1990 to present, we have a new alternative science emerging. There's a lot of people doing research in alternative science, and this, I hope, is a return to rationality. Of course, the orthodox physicists will poo-poo guys like me and try and sweep us under the rug, but we still stick our heads out and keep bugging them. Etheric physics is returning into an orthodox science. The elements of nature are made of the will of God. That's a quote from Hermes Trismegistus. He was one of the early healers using alternative science methods. Of course, this is going to result in some interesting things. We're going to get over unity energy, free energy. We're going to be able to power cars and things. When the Tesla car came out, I happened to see one of the Tesla cars when it first came out. And the guy asked me, what do I think about it? I said, well, it looks like an expensive golf cart to me. Because as long as you got a battery in it, you're very limited. And now the charging time and stuff for those batteries is ridiculous. I think we're going to go to gravity control, personal planetary vehicles, and things like that. We're going to get fast and light communication. This was demonstrated. GCOM, they demonstrated a communication between Germany and Australia. And they had faster than sea communication, demonstrated that as well, and very nice. We're going to have transportation of the elements. Right now, we're constrained to digging stuff out of the ground and nuclear transmutation, which is kind of silly and stupid. We're going to have the ability to dissolve matter. You know, taking stuff to the dump is kind of dumb. We'll probably have garbage cans you throw trash in and it never fills up. One time I saw this demonstrated by a friend of mine. There's an emerging new the emerging new science has to head in the following way. The manifest universe, from subatomics to galaxy levels, is due to creative flows of non-Hertzian energies. You can call them scalar or anything you want, but they mostly have to do with the intelligent medium. Now, these creative flows define how the universe manifests in all levels of existence, thus defining nature at all levels. Now, one of the people that I studied quite extensively, because a friend of mine had an extensive library, was KEELY used sound vibrations to convert water to pure energy. And this was later proved by a guy I called Dr. X, who was a friend of mine. He's actually had 4 PhDs. A couple of them were from Berkeley and Stanford. And he accidentally did conversion of water to pure energy. And it was quite a dramatic experiment. It's talked about in the Shea-Bear book. Now, KEELY tried to develop a KEELY motor, a free energy motor, and had a basic stock that he let out called the KEELY Motor Company. And he basically had to give that up. KEELY realized he had to understand matter and energy. He developed a complete but arcane view of the universe. KEELY was back in the late 1800s, and he had nothing to go on, so he developed his own vocabulary. And you have to understand the vocabulary, which takes a bit of studying. And of course, I mentioned the validation of the experiment. There's a picture of the old boy himself, standing next to his globe motor in 1898. KEELY learned basic music from his grandfather, who was head of the Baden-Baden, the Baden-Baden Symphony Orchestra. And so KEELY was very adept at playing the violin, and that's how he came across his experiment to explode water. It explained quite detailed in the Shea-Bear book. Now, I discovered a basic interesting law. A friend of mine who had their inner sight opened. Inner sight means you can see beyond the physical spectrum. And when I would draw 2 lines converging on the board, which is how I visualize something happening with the gravity field and the etheric field in the pyramid energy, this person with this clairvoyant could see a spiral vortex formed between these two lines. You could either use physical lines or you could draw them on a chalkboard. And of course, I detail this in a book also. And this was verified quite readily with a fluxgate magnetometer, because a rotating etheric field is a magnetic field, and you can measure it with a very sensitive measuring device called a fluxgate magnetometer. And I asked a friend of mine named Joe Parr if he would verify this. Now, Joe Parr was married to a Chinese lady, and they used to have a lot of chopsticks around the house. So Joe stuck some chopsticks into a styrofoam ball, then measured the electromagnetic and static fields at the intersection of the rods. That created a magnetic field that he could measure. Now, if you look at some of the other shapes, excuse me, you can see we have converging lines in a regular triangle, so the magnetic field is going to concentrate at the corners. Now, a circle or a sphere is basically an infinite number of converging points, and it focuses a magnetic field in the center. A cylinder does the same sort of thing. It's just a basic special condition of the circle. And of course, there's the three base pyramid with one on top, the tetrahedron, and of course there's the fourhedron, the regular pyramid. And what happens in a pyramid is you get these force fields at the corners, plus you get the one in the center. This is due to all the forces of the corners focalized at the 1/3 height level. And if you've ever studied some of the weird effects of pyramid energy, like desiccating meat and stuff like that, it happens most readily at the 1/3 height level of the pyramid. Now, the step pyramid is a series of gradually squares that reduce in size to the top, which is the peak. And of course, you're going to get a lot of effects based on this type of pyramid. Now, Larry Babcock was a geophysicist from Tucson and discovered some gravity effects in geophysics. And he was working for a company back east at the time. This is quite a while ago. And he discovered that they were working in the iron mines in the range there in the Middle East. They found that the Earth is stratified. In other words, when a volcano goes off, it leaves off so much lava, but it forms at a specific width. And Larry was able to measure this. And it turned out that the correlation of Larry's stuff with Vastu science was almost 100%. But the Vastu science was the ancient Hindu science, and it was used as a basis for much of their science and research that went on in India back at the time when they built the anti-gravity devices and things. But the family still exists that builds Vastu science applied to temples that they built in India. Now, natural growth is quantized, and if you look at a side of a mountain, sometimes you can see all these different layers, and they're all related to a specific gravity wavelength. Now, flying bugs. Viktor Grebennikov and his flying platform. This happens to be a picture of him standing on the ground and then levitating several feet off the ground after he messes with these controllers here in the column of the gravity platform. Now, I did a lot of research on this and came to the conclusion that the gravity bug that he was using was not the bumblebee, like what a lot of people think that bumblebee has can lift even though he supposedly cannot fly. Grebennikov chose the beetle, and beetle has some interesting properties. When it has some wing covers that lift off and flap very gently, and the beetle lifts off the ground. It's actually levitating. And you can prove this. Grebennikov proved it by taking a bunch of these wing covers and putting them in the lab, and found out that if you dropped a lightweight over the beetle covers, they would get deflected to the side. The bumblebee doesn't actually. They've taken high-speed photography, and it shows the bumblebee's wings flap fast enough to create lift. And so you're left with this strange insect. Some of the beetles are giant. I mean, they're several inches long, and you wonder how anything like that can fly, and it doesn't fly, it gravitates. Of course, here's a picture of a beetle, and it was the one that Grebennikov used. This is a scanning electron microscope pictures. Now, a friend of mine, Dr. Ted Loader, was working at the university, and one of his associates there had access to a scanning electron microscope. And so he convinced this lady that was in charge of the microscope to take some pictures. There's a number of these pictures in the Shape Our book, but you can see that there are some strange looking things that nature has built into these wings. So this is the micrograph level. Now, one of the most interesting statements by Grebennikov in a chapter entitled Flight from his book on entomology is regarding the multi-layered chitin. Now, chitin is a biochemical that is found in various bugs and happens to be what the wings are made of. And he said, "You can imagine what I felt at that moment when I came to my senses. I tied a few panels with wire. It wasn't easy to do, and I only succeeded when I positioned them vertically. What I got was a multi-layered chitin block. I put it on the desk. Even a relatively charged object, such as a paper tack, could not fall onto it." In other words, you try to drop a paper tack into this chitin block, and it would deflect the paper tack away from the thing and wouldn't fall to the side. Now, Dr. Z was another interesting thing, an interesting guy I ran across. I call these guys Dr. X, Dr. Z, because they didn't want to be known to the world. They were doing stuff that could probably get them hurt. He discovered a similar gravity effect by studying the Bible. And he succeeded in raising a 2,300 pound pyramid, a step pyramid 6 feet off the ground, so fast that observers couldn't see any movement between the sitting on the floor and the 6 feet higher. Now what happened was two welders were welding the pyramid together, and they were apart, so they had a welding machine, two welding machines, and these welding machines created a interface into the pyramid and caused the anti-gravity effect. And I computed the horsepower was 1,476 horsepower, or over 1,000,000 watts, and the efficiency of this effect was 22,400%. Now, Dr. Z was trying to get the military interested in this, and was unable to get any interest. And he developed a method for charging water and purifying water with the step pyramid. And he could shoot a stream of water 25 miles. That's what he claimed to me. Now, this looks like a far-fetched story, but if you saw this thing in action, you'd wonder what's going on. The ether charged the water, reduced radioactivity to zero instantly. In other words, water from this water shooter would actually reduce radioactivity to zero, and that's they measured. And he tried to sell this, and nobody was interested. And the water shooter is a simple state power device, and as I said, it would shoot 25 miles supposedly. I never saw the 25 miles, but it would shoot long ways. This is the device, just to show that I got some traction on what's going on here. The water shooter would shoot through these different layers, and he had charge bottom and top as this water went through. Now, a man named Reed of Rupert, Canada, invented a levitation belt. And one of the guys that studied Reed belt came to me and asked me if I'd analyze this thing, and I'd see if I could figure it out. Unfortunately, Reed was a lousy documenter. In fact, he was not even any kind of a documenter. He just built it and demonstrated it. But what happened was he was either a Cadillac or a Graham Page. This is back in 1928 or 26, somewhere in that era. And in Canada, and this guy was going, a rich guy was driving this fancy car across Canada, and it died outside this town of Rupert, Canada. And Reed went out with his horses and dragged the car in with the horses, and took a look at the engine and came to the conclusion that the coil from the electric system was causing the problem. And Reed made several coils and found they all acted the same way. What happened was when you energized the coil the first time, it actually jumped off the mechanic's bench and jumped onto the floor. And as a result of this, Reed had a leather worker in town make him a belt that holds several of the coils, plus a car battery. And this is back in the 1928, 29, that era. And Reed was observed flying over a bog right next to the town with his gravity belt. And one time he made the news in that his vibrator for this coil froze up on him, and he dropped into the drink. They got a dunking. I had to rescue him and had to rescue his belt and all that. Now this is if you look at a shape power craft. If assuming you could build a tetrahedron that has a gravity effect, you could use them as controls for some kind of a craft. Like you could use it for pushing and flying in outer space. You could put some on the front and move it and aim it in different directions and point it and steer it. And basically you'd have to have some kind of power box to power these tetrahedrons and a controller of some kind. That was, of course, speculation. Task 1 is to build that levitating tetrahedron. Now, the summary of some of the shape power discoveries. As you can see, shape power has some interesting possibilities. Areas of invention cover things like solutions to the energy applications. In other words, you could mount a bunch of these tetrahedrons on a wheel and cause it to turn at high speeds. You could use it for transportation, as I shown. Communication. We've done some of the studies and some other things that have been verified, not by myself, but other friends, and they get faster than light transmission of the energies. And this alone is just a fascinating area. It opens up a huge area of science, not just having a radio type device that communicates all over the whole earth, but you can have it for all kinds of communication that exists between the planets and things like this. And then, of course, you can have a solution for the radioactive pollution. But anyway, some of the fantastic things that are possible with shape power are unbelievable. I've made little toys out of some of the stuff and have things that work. Like one thing I carry here in my pocket. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how to do this thing. Okay, this happens to be a shape power device, and if you flip it over, you can see this thing. This device is about 1.75 inches in diameter. It's kind of like the chips that they use for poker in the casinos, and it's a shape power device. It puts out a field that is measured by clairvoyants that can see it for 6 feet out here. It's a beam of twisting energy flowing out for about 6 feet. And people have taken 2 of these and put them together. And there's a science that I've been working on called etheric science. And one of the things with etheric science is any pattern of an object, if energized, will create the object. Now, one time I got a call on a Saturday from somebody, and he was a young guy. I could tell by his voice and stuff. He was young. He'd seen Star Wars and Star Trek and all this stuff. And he asked me, he said, Mr. Davidson, do you think we'll ever get to the point for having the T generator? And this is pretty astute observation. And I told him, I said, yes, I think we can do it. And this is the way, if you can define the pattern of an object and energize it, you can create the object. So creating the pattern of T, you create the T. And they never followed this through with on the Star Trek program. But if they don't have to go look for these dilithium crystals, they could just get the pattern of the dilithium crystal and create crystals using etheric science. And that's how they manifest that stuff. Anyway, back here to the, you can test me back, Steve. Steve, you can turn the slides back on.
They are on.
Anyway, I went through this slide about the possibilities of shape power and etheric science, some of this stuff. This young guy that called me says, what do you have to do to get into something like this? And I said, well, you need to get an education. You need at least a Bachelor of Science. You need or a Bachelor of Arts and some hard science. You don't want to get something in bender basket powder waving. You want to get a degree in physics, engineering, or mathematics. Otherwise, you don't have a background to know what's known and what is unknown. You can't develop an alternative new type of invention if you don't know what's already been invented. And you need to understand how to do inventions. And you do that by learning physics. You do it by learning the engineering of materials and various things. And you also need to clean up yourself in consciousness on a spiritual level, because it has been my experience that the masters have unlimited amounts of inventions sitting on the inner level. Some of the inventions that I got, I could show you, were shown to me in visions. And so you got to learn who you are. You're more than just a lump of clay that's conscious and can think a little bit. You're a spiritual being occupying a physical body. And when you finally tune into that and become one with it, you can do some good in the world. But until you clean yourself up and operate on a high level, you're just another piece of flotsam out there and like the rest of mankind. Been a pleasure talking to you. And that's the end of my slides. And God bless you. And I hope you all will get busy and learn your science.
Well, we don't seem to have any comments tonight, but I'd just like to take and reiterate, that we do have Dan's latest book available, Shape Power, and you can get it at TeslaTech. And we'll get it sent out right away as soon as you order. And let's see. This is what it looks like, Shape Power by Dan Davidson. This is the second edition.
Yeah, this second edition has a lot of extra stuff in it. I actually wrote a small booklet after Shape Power came out and described a lot of these things like the Dr. Z experiment and some of those other things. And discuss some of the gravity theories and stuff that exist in alternative science. So getting that book, you'll get a real good education as far as some of the crazy things we're working on. There's just no limit to what you can do. I consider our civilization barely out of the Stone Age as far as what we're doing. We're still using rockets and other ridiculous things to take us into outer space. And we should be using some kind of anti-gravity device. And if people had any sense, they'd put their energies into developing anti-gravity because that's where it's all at. Now, of course, you've heard these supposedly conspiracy theories that our government already has it. It's entirely possible. I've seen some of the stuff that our government has done, these triangular spacecraft. And I actually ended up working at one of the companies that had developed this triangular spacecraft. So there's all kinds of stuff that are out there. And we need to kick our congressmen in the butt and tell them to get busy and release this information and get us into outer space. It's going to put the oil companies a little bit in a cramp because they're only going to be selling plastic. They're not going to be selling internal combustion engines. The old guy, Dr. Campbell, was the head of the old science fiction magazine, and one of the articles he wrote was that the internal combustion engine was an invention of the devil. And that's about right. I mean, it's a polluter. It's a crummy thing. We're doing everything to stop the pollution of these things. We've come up with electric engines, electric motors, electric cars, and even Elon Musk, who builds the Tesla car, says we're not going to make it with electric cars. We got to have free energy cars in case you're interested. And he said there's just simply not enough battery capability ever to come up with a viable car that'll replace the internal combustion car. And we pretty much perfected the IC engine and could be used and is being used worldwide. But the electric car, I think, is a fiction until we get free energy. That's about all I got, Steve.
Okay. Well, I like to say that Dan is a legend. He has worked with this forever. And I know we have at least 6 of your videos already up on the YouTube channel from over the years, from the Tesla conferences and everything. Um, I'm a believer. What really fascinated me was in your energy breakthrough book, where it talks about you had a cylinder of water with a transducer that when they hit a certain frequency, shot a hole through the ceiling of the facility. It was stuff like that that has really caught my eye, and I believe in the power of water, and I believe in shape power. And I thank you for coming up with a new edition of the book. You know, I hope that more people in the future will go back and return to our roots here and look at the shape power. You know, and and we had a few comments here from Grandmaster, and he talks about water, the infinite fuel.
Well, you're asking, could you use the shape power effect or or something that explodes water and use it as a fuel? KEELY tried this and was not able to ever get it under control because it is too wild of a reaction. The the guy, Dr. X, that demonstrated it, took a column of water that was about 6 inches long and an inch and a half in diameter. And when it turned into pure energy, it blasted a hole through the laboratory ceiling, through the building of the laboratory, and out into outer space. And how far it went, we have no idea, because he never could measure that. But he was so scared by what he had done that he put the thing on the shelf and wouldn't talk about it again. In fact, he dug the notes that he took out of the file and showed them to me and the experiment and what he had done.
Okay.
That's it. David, anything else?
That's just about it for tonight. Thank you for coming, and we'll be in touch, Dan, and bless you, and thank you for all the work you've done for humanity here. And see you on the other side.
Hey, stand by.